Hey folks, before we get started, I just wanted to tell you, you can unlock unlimited access to political news, commentary, opinion, and a whole lot more at inforum.news/port for only 99 cents a month for your first 3 months. Hurry, get this limited time offer at inforum.news/port now. This podcast is brought to you by the North Dakota Petroleum Foundation. From heating our homes, empowering our vehicles, to cell phones, clothing, and medical equipment, oil and natural gas makes everyday life better. North Dakota Oil and Natural Gas, advancing the possibilities. Learn more at ndpetroleumfoundation.org. Welcome to Plain Talk, and I swear, Chad Oban, who of course is my co-host on Wednesdays, asked me if I purposely decided to schedule this interview for April 20th, 420, and I did not. That was a total accident, not. It was just how it happened. But we're doing it.
I should have known you weren't that clever, Rob.
I'm not.
Just assume that.
I'm not clever. I am a blunt instrument. I'm as subtle as an avalanche. So that's just what I am. No, not that clever, but we are going to talk about a new ballot measure to try to legalize medical marijuana. We've seen several, not medical marijuana. Geez, we've already legalized medical marijuana. What am I talking about? Recreational marijuana is what we're going to be talking about. So people using it for reasons that are not medical. And I was arguing that we ought to just legalize marijuana full bore when we were doing the medical thing, right? Like, just if you look at the way medical marijuana is kind of played out in other states, a lot of the medical reasons that people are using it, and I don't want to disparage anybody who's finding relief from marijuana. Like, that's great. If it's working for you, great. But let's be honest. A lot of the medical justifications for using marijuana are pretty facetious. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. What's in front of us now is a new ballot measure effort to collect signatures, get on the statewide ballot, and pass a law making it legal to obtain marijuana and possess it and use it for no medical reason at all, just because you enjoy it. Here to talk with me about that is State Representative Matt Ruby. He's a Republican from Minot, as well as Mark Friese, who is a member of the sponsoring committee. He's an attorney from the Vogel Law Firm in the city of Fargo. And first of all, gentlemen, welcome. Thank you for coming on and talking with us about this.
Thanks for having us, Rob.
So what's different about this measure from past efforts?
I guess I'll start. Rob, as you know, I was a vocal and outspoken critic of prior efforts because they swept too broadly. They would have adversely impacted North Dakota law. They would have done things like legalized impaired driving if it was impairment caused by marijuana. It would have actually legalized some types of criminal activity if the person was using marijuana at the time. I mean, it was just very inartfully drafted, and it had profound negative impacts on North Dakota law. So the previous efforts to have a ballot measure, I was very critical. I supported the overall concept of allowing people over the age of 21 to use marijuana without criminal penalties, because I've seen the societal costs that this has had and the impact that criminalizing marijuana has had on people. So when this group approached me and asked if I would support, and they outlined that they were going to be advancing a measure which largely replicated what the House of Representatives did last session, I willingly agreed to participate.
So Representative Ruby, why not make another run at trying to pass this in the legislature rather than going to the ballot this November?
I think mainly is we're just out there. We're always going to hear that argument that the people don't want this, even though it has incrementally gotten more and more support. And the states around us are South Dakota passed it. It was kicked off with the technicality. Montana's got it. Minnesota saw it in their session last year. I don't know if they have a ballot measure coming, but you kind of look at like states and it's passing there. It's getting a lot more accepted, and but we still, every time we bring it forward, it's we should see what the people want. So I think this is a way to this is how we're going to do that. And I kind of got on board with it because I want to see something that's tailored for North Dakota, fit fits in with our century code, and that we don't end up with, every time you bring it up with somebody that's staunchly against this, they say, well, we don't want to end up like Colorado. Colorado is the first state to do it. Obviously, we're not going to be in that same situation, but we don't want that free for all. And this is a really, really good compromise that I think we've got some quality here.
I want to get into some of those specifics, but I will say, I mean, people saying that the people don't want it. I think the medical marijuana bill, although poorly drafted and had to be corrected by the legislature, proved that North Dakotans are ready to begin legalizing this. Now, obviously, understanding medical marijuana that's a different policy question than the one your ballot measure is going to be asking. But I think the people out there who are saying North Dakotans don't want this, I think are maybe underestimating where North Dakotans are at. I guess if you guys make the ballot, we're going to find out. And maybe as somebody who kind of infamously does not like ballot measures, I don't like making complicated public policy at the ballot box. In a debate like this, I mean, I guess it is kind of nice to be able to ask the voters where they're at. But let's get into specifics. What is this bill? Because this bill isn't like 2 lines. Marijuana is now legal. It does a lot of stuff in terms of regs. So can you give us like the bullet points of how it would, if this becomes law, how does marijuana get produced? How does it get sold? How do people go about getting their hands on it? How would it work?
And I can start a little bit on that, Rob. First off, there's going to be a number of personal protections and limitations as it relates to prosecutions of people over the age of 21. They will still be subject to prosecution, still subject to regulation if it's a person under the age of 21. I think a good way to compare it is it's going to be treated a lot like underage, meaning under the age of 21, possession or consumption of alcohol. Individuals will be, if this does pass, will be permitted to possess up to 1 ounce of cannabis flower, up to 4 grams of concentrate, and 500 milligrams of THC in the form of a cannabis product. The measure would also provide for what people commonly call home grow. Individuals could grow up to 3 cannabis plants if they're kept in the same location. This is comparable with what others, in fact, it's quite a bit less than what other states have done. And as Representative Ruby indicated, he's correct. There's 18 states across the country that have legalized marijuana, along with DC and Guam. So 20 entities or 20 groups collectively. And central to most of those measures and legalization efforts are the ability to grow your own. Most states are doing 6. This would allow half of that amount.
Do you? Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Chad.
How about the tax revenue? Is it going to be taxed in a similar way as other sin taxes, tobacco and alcohol? And then is there a place where the revenue is earmarked for?
The bill here, or the measure here, would not contain a separate tax provision. And Representative Ruby can probably speak more to this. Last session, the House of Representatives had 2 separate bills, one to legalize marijuana and then a separate one for taxation. This would not prohibit the state or municipalities from imposing additional taxes. Current taxes, sales taxes, would still be in effect, but it doesn't have a separate additional tax. Monies collected from the licensing process would be used for enforcement, and it would place most of the regulatory scheme within the Department of Human Services to manage the program.
Yeah, and one point I want to bring up is that this does have the home grow provision, which 1420 last session did not. And without that, I think we got a little high on the tax amount in that separate tax bill. And the problem with having that, well, I mean, there's so many people that are worried about the home grow. And if you get that tax too high, you're either going to just send people to the black market, or you're going to really see a lot more people growing, which I really don't see that many are going to do the home grow. I mean, there certainly can, but that's a lot of work. It's a lot more convenient to be able to go to a dispensary and get it that way. So, I think it was smart to leave it up to the legislator to handle the tax part. There is that chance that it gets too high, and then it just kind of pushes everyone to the black market anyway. But it gets really confusing. It gets a lot easier to kind of talk down the measure if it gets really convoluted with that extra tax stuff in there. I don't fully understand every bit of tax thing that I see in the legislature. So I'm not going to say that everybody that's going to vote for this, I don't want to say that they're uninformed or they won't understand it. I'm just saying it gets convoluted. So I think it's a good thing to keep it separate.
And Chad, to your point, it also will vest the Department of Health and Human Services with the ability to develop regulations. And we put a drop dead deadline in there, October 1st of 2023. So there would be ample time for development of regulations and those regulations would establish, security of cannabis establishments, advertising, limitations on advertising, packaging, labeling, standards for testing. The notion here is that this is all going to go to the folks that have the expertise in the background and can consult with the experts, and it would be done by administrative regulation rather than becoming even more complicated than it already is.
And is there a limit on dispensaries?
Yes, yeah, there is. And this is one of the points that I visited with other folks about. I mean, when I was asked to join this, I would prefer to let the free market do that, right? So this measure represents compromise too. And what the folks that drafted the ballot measure did is they took the numbers and the limitations that the legislature had established in the House bill that was presented last session and incorporated those into the measure. So there are limits on the numbers of licenses, limits on the number of dispensaries. There's limits on the number of business interests and entities people can have, but there's also recognition of local control. So if a local municipality says, we don't want this business, if Carpio, North Dakota says we don't want marijuana businesses and they're a recognized city political subdivision, they can prohibit it in their city. So it's a compromise in that regard.
I know some people from Carpio, and I think they're going to love having access to marijuana. That's probably terrible for me to say. One thing, and before I get to my question, I think one of the big struggles here, and for me, one of the big arguments in favor of legalizing marijuana is this idea that we're stopping anybody who wants marijuana from getting it now, which we aren't. It's readily available. It's everywhere. Yes, it's a risk. If the cops catch you, you're going to get in trouble. But come on. Every community, even in Carpio, right, you can get marijuana. It's in every city in the state. The idea that we're stopping this stuff is ridiculous. So in my mind, let's bring it out to the sunlight where we can deal with the negative externalities out in the open, and we can stop enriching people who are maybe, I mean, I'm not saying everybody who deals pot is a terrible criminal, but a lot of the people who traffic in it are not so great people, and I would rather, law-abiding business people, make money from selling marijuana as opposed to them. That's just my 2 cents. But let me ask you this: the one thing that as somebody who's very much in favor of doing this, the one thing that gives me pause, other than the idea that it's going to be so regulated that legitimate marijuana dealers are not going to be able to compete with the black market. The other thing is how do we make this work with our laws prohibiting like inebriated driving? How does that work? It seems like it's real. I mean, with alcohol, it's relatively simple to do a blood test or a breath test. I mean, we have things in place where this is relatively easy to measure. It's not so easy to tell if someone's been smoking marijuana in driving, which I don't want people to do. But as a matter of, it seems like that's going to be a lot more difficult. Or in the workplace, right, where it's legal. So if I'm running a forklift or driving a payloader or something, and I have marijuana in my system, I mean, how do we grapple with those issues?
So the workforce one, I mean, that's already that's sort of addressed in the bill where it talks about it. If you've got it in your system and you're driving a forklift and there's an accident or something like that, I mean, that's that you're probably not going to get your claim or workers' comp claim approved. I mean, that's something that I personally believe in a lot, is a personal responsibility when you do something like this, and that's something that you got to accept. That if it's in your system and you mess up at work. Now, obviously, the level of how much is in you to determine how recently you would use. That we're seeing strides in that, which was a big sticking point last session with 1420. But we are seeing, I don't want to call them breathalyzers, but they're, I mean, pretty close to the same concept that are getting better and better results. So I don't know if we're 100% there to be rolling them out yet. We haven't got a chance to speak with law enforcement just yet. I think that's one of our next steps, but we're not too far off with that, with being able to discover that. Now that you're still going to have your just like with the prescription, if you've got too much of that in your system and it shows that you are inebriated, you can still get a DUI. That's still going to happen with this. So we have that built in. It's just going to be this detecting part that we still need to get caught up to us.
I think law enforcement's doing a good job of catching up with that issue, right? I mean, law enforcement officers are routinely arresting people who are under the influence of prescription drugs. They don't take a blood sample or urine sample to weigh out the nanograms per milliliters of the controlled substance that's in their body, whether prescribed or not. Law enforcement officers are going to look for traditional indicia of impairment. We have a number of law enforcement officers who are what are referred to as drug recognition experts. They get specialized training to do a battery of tests that will reveal impairment. It's a lot of, I know it when I see it, right? You can tell when somebody's impaired, when their cognition is slowed, when they're slow to respond to questions, when they have difficulty with motor tasks. Police are going to continue to enforce the law just the way that they have. And as Representative Ruby indicated, this measure specifically protects employers and their ability to continue to enforce existing workplace regulations that restrict the use of cannabis. It also restricts the use of cannabis in public places, on public transportation. It's really narrowly tailored and limited in its reach.
So is that just? I'm sorry, just on like the inebriated. I mean, is it like it's like the touch the nose test and stuff like that? Like that's what you're talking about? Where I mean, whether I'm drunk or whether I'm stoned on marijuana or on opioids or whatever, you know, if I can't touch my nose, if I can't, you know, have good motor functions, I shouldn't be driving a car. Is that what you're saying? Like that's still the standard?
Yeah, absolutely. That's the standard. And they have modified Bromberg tests, for example. They do respirations, they do pulse, they do blood pressures. There are law enforcement officers that are trained to determine whether somebody's under the influence of a depressant or some other type of substance based on physical indications and vital signs that they see of the person in conjunction with these tests that we routinely see.
And I got to think the proliferation of like dash cameras and body cameras and everything helped too, right? I mean, then in court you could say, listen, this guy was incoherent. This person couldn't walk straight. I mean, that all matters too, right?
They've got all the tests. A lot of them will. I don't know. I don't have a whole number of how many will cross over from, you know, say alcohol to this, but the one that I always hear that always gets brought up is how your eye reacts when you're under the influence of something, and that whether it's following the finger and it twitches back or something like that, I think is how it works. That's a really, really good one. That, like I said, every time that we've ever talked about this with any sort of law enforcement, that gets brought up. So I think we're going to be all right. You know, you have all these different tests, and that's the same with the alcohol stop. They're just building a case. So even if they don't get the breathalyzer, they've got all these other tests. And if you fail those tests, and that's their case to bring to the judge, and it'll be the same thing. I think they've been doing a good job with it up to this point. And I just because we legalize it doesn't mean that that's going to change.
So going back to sort of the business employer side of things, we know at the last time there's a ballot measure on, and Mark, you referenced how broad that was and had a lot of problems, but you had the state chamber who sort of led the efforts against it, along with the general contractors and some other pretty big interest groups on the business side of things. Do you think having the language in that protects employers and is maybe a little clear that it doesn't affect inebriated driving and that kind of stuff will at least get those groups to sit out of the campaign or maybe even support? Have you had conversations with the business community yet?
I haven't. I can tell you, Chad, that I'm involved with this because of that specific reason. I like the policy of getting the government out of prosecuting people criminally for something that's probably more benign than alcohol, right? But I did not like that it impaired employers' ability to regulate their employees. I did not like that it impaired law enforcement in their ability to prosecute offenses. I did not like the collateral effects of previous efforts. So I think, and I mean, speaking for myself, I think that there are a lot of people in my camp, and I talked to a lot of lawyers with the last ballot measures that said, I really like this idea, but they're doing it the wrong way. So I think my guess is that there's going to be a lot of people like me and my colleagues, including employers and businesses, who say, yeah, this is a much more moderate approach. This is something that we can work with and we can make some decisions from there. And it's more restrictive really than a lot of other states have done. So it's a moderate North Dakota and tailored to North Dakota approach. So I'm hopeful and I'm optimistic that the voters will agree.
Yeah, and this language that we have in here protecting the employers is nearly verbatim to what 1420 had, and that actually came from the Greater North Dakota Chamber. Now we didn't, like I said, we haven't talked to them yet to figure out where they're at with it, but it is what they had requested in 1420. So I think, like what Mark said, is there's going to be a lot of people that still don't agree with the concept, but understanding that it's coming forward and it will happen eventually, it's kind of a best case scenario, best compromise that we can come up with. And I think that I'm hoping that they will understand that we took that in consideration. We brought in their protections, and at least it keeps them on the sidelines.
How does the bill deal with the fact that there is obviously already a very, very significant black market that's being served for recreational marijuana in North Dakota? So, for instance, if I get pulled over and I've got a joint and maybe the amounts and everything is in accordance with this new law, how does law enforcement tell that I bought that joint legally versus from the black market?
And I think that's going to be difficult to do, right? Because and what happens if somebody buys it legally in Colorado and then brings it to North Dakota? The way this is drafted, the way that I would see law enforcement interpreting it is if it falls within those presumptive amounts, within the presumptive possession amounts, the individual is going to be protected from enforcement action. So if I'm stopped and I have a single joint that's within the user quantities, and is not subject to prosecution. But I think the corresponding argument or the issue that you're trying to raise is, well, is this going to cause people to grow more than they should or raise more than they should? Or is this going to create a larger black market? I really don't think so. As Representative Ruby alluded to, growing marijuana plants is a lot more difficult than you would think it is. And once the market and the system gets into place, it's going to be easier and more effective to go to some place where it's regulated, some place where it's dispensed and it's safe, it's been tested, and it's going to be affordable. So I think it'll work out. It'll take a little time to do, but the individual will be protected from prosecution, and I think that's important for folks in my camp anyway.
Yeah, and I mean, realistically, you're not going to be able to tell if it was someone down the street that grew it or a manufacturer or grow facility that's licensed through a state. But it kind of comes back to the whole point of, or the whole perk of buying legally is you get that quality control, which is built into this measure from the testing from the seed to the sale. And then I don't think that we have it over-regulated where it's going to kill the legal market. And then the big piece is going to make sure that we don't overtax it to where it kills the legal market. So that's, like I said, pure testing, you're not going to be able to tell the difference what came from black market and what came from a dispensary, but it's convenience, quality control. That's the kind of things that I think we need to keep the legal market going, and that's where your protection is, and hopefully we can really cut into that black market.
Representative Ruby, you referenced South Dakota earlier and that sort of getting thrown out on a technicality. I think that's a nice way to put it. I think that the governor in South Dakota is ignoring the will of the voters in South Dakota. They could have easily just let that technicality go through. How do you avoid that kind of thing in North Dakota, right? I mean, South Dakota, it's a pretty overwhelming vote that still politicians saw it as politically advantageous to be against it, which doesn't make sense to me. But how do you avoid those situations where you pass this thing and then, the pro-medical marijuana people would say the legislature is sort of screwing around with the thing that they passed? I disagree with that. It was fixing it. But how do you avoid sort of what's going on in South Dakota happening here?
Well, number one is, that was kicked out because of, they said that there was too many topics, really, really weak argument consider it. Just to really brush on it, I got a kind of a spin up on it too, but they passed the legal portion or the medical portion. And then they said, by a certain date, you need to have legalize or full legalization. And then also on that same ballot was just medical. And so what the judge said is that portion that said also have a full legalization counts as a second topic, and that they felt that voters misled because they thought they were only voting for medical, even though there was a pure medical and there's a medical and a recreational. So kind of we don't have that. Obviously, the legislature has single topic bills, unless it's appropriations, apparently. But that's one part of it. As far as thinking that the legislature or the judiciary branch is going to throw it out, and we just have to be really careful on signature gathering and make sure that's correct. There's nothing sketchy with that. We've had two election cycles now that measures have been tossed off, and I don't know how often that is, but or how often that happened before, but I couldn't believe it last time with I don't remember what it was.
It was the election reform. It was all sorts of changes that they were making. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that one, and then this year with the term limits, so that's our next meeting. That's going to be a huge emphasis, is making sure that we understand. It's got to be North Dakota signature gatherers. Now, when we get into session, that's kind of the perk of working off of 1420 as a template, is that we already are working off of something that passed one of the houses. And so I don't think we're going to see too many changes. I would venture guess that there's going to be somebody that's going to come after the home grow. I will be on the committee that sees it, and I will do everything I can to make sure that bill doesn't pass. Because I understand they're freaking out about. Some people really, really worry about the home grow portion, but it's like we established, it's not that easy. Convenience usually wins out. There's, other than hobby people, how many people do you see growing their or making their own beer or growing tobacco or anything like that? So that I think that's a big part of it. Is in committee we really have to stress that this was front and center. People knew that this is what they were voting for. Just because a handful don't really like it, we shouldn't be trying to change it too much. And so I think that's kind of where we're at with it. Is it's and why I was happy to get on board with this is a solid compromise. Some would like it a lot more wide, and some would like it more restricted down. But so I think we take this into session, and we can maintain what passes.
One thing too, as we have just a few minutes left here, I think one thing to remember is the context that this debate is happening. First of all, everyone who wants marijuana in North Dakota is getting marijuana. That's just a reality on the ground. We have laws against it, and the laws and law enforcement's enforcing the law. It's just become an impossible task. It is a Sisyphean task to try to stop people from obtaining and using marijuana illegally in the state of North Dakota, or anywhere else for that matter. It's just not happening. Culturally, our attitudes about marijuana have shifted incredibly. And also, if this ballot measure isn't 100% perfect. Let's say we put it in the law and we find out, well, this tax part's not working, or this prohibition's not, this regulation is not working, whatever it is. We can change it, right? I think the larger question is, should recreational marijuana be legal in North Dakota? I think that's the question being asked for voters. I think the voters' answer to that is probably going to be yes. Majority yes. From there, once this is implemented, the legislature can make additional changes. The administrative people in the Department of Health, or whoever it is in charge of administering the law, they can make changes. They can make adjustments. But I think the question being asked here is, should recreational marijuana be legal? I think the answer to that is yes. We can fix the rest of it as we go. Because, again, everybody who wants marijuana is using marijuana. Like, we're not allowing some new thing here. It's already here. So the question is, how do we bring this into the daylight? And I don't know that we can make a lot of bad mistakes doing that. I shouldn't say that. There are some. I also didn't like the part where, employers should be able to regulate how it's incorporated into their workplace and stuff like that. But beyond that, I don't know. This seems like a very easy question to me, and I don't want to I'm worried that we're going to get way down in the weeds about a lot of stuff that, frankly, if it becomes a problem, we can fix it.
And I think a lot of those fixes are up front, Rob. There were a lot of stakeholders, and this group, this sponsoring committee, is comprised of a lot of people. Those in my business make money out of marijuana. I represent people who are charged with crimes for marijuana. So this is against my own self-interest, but this is good policy. We need to dedicate law enforcement resources things where they're needed. We're already overtasking them in really everything that they do. And the reality is marijuana has proven to be really benign as it relates. There's in the history of the world, there's never been a reported overdose death from marijuana. Let's look at spending our resources wisely and doing it in a way and involving enough stakeholders that we have, as Representative Ruby indicated, really a compromise and fixing those things up front, which I think this has done.
There's been a lot of concern in the past expressed, some by Rob, about measures being funded by out-of-state organizations. It's a tight timeline for you guys to get the signatures to get on the November ballot. Can you talk at all about how this thing is being funded? I assume you're going to pay signature gatherers.
They sent out
way.
I got an email specifically saying we're looking to hire. So
yeah. So how? I mean, where is the funding coming from? I mean, will you admit that you're going to have to pay signature gatherers, even though it sounds like you don't have to admit anything because Rob's they're trying to hire him?
Not only admit, we're upfront. We're taking volunteers as well, and all this is available on the campaign's website, newapproachnd.org. So volunteers as well as hiring people. And I don't think we need to make any apologies for hiring people to collect signatures. We've hired lawyers to look at this. We've hired people with accounting backgrounds. We've hired industry experts, people who are presenting legislation to the legislature, hire lobbyists. If we're going out and getting a car fixed, we hire a mechanic. Hiring people to help with this, especially when it's a short time frame and a heavy lift, is nothing to apologize for, in my view. We have a short time frame. We have till July to get 15,582 signatures if we want this on the November ballot. We have a comprehensive scheme in place to train and educate. We've hired employment lawyers and lawyers familiar with the ballot collection process in North Dakota. So anybody who's employed or volunteered to help with the campaign is going to go through a training protocol to make sure that this is done correctly. It's going to be monitored and there's going to be oversight. We're getting money. It's not only money from national folks, it's people locally. We have campaigns from individuals and businesses locally. We have philanthropists who are donating. We have people that have worked successfully on other ballot measures and public policy, that have public policy interests from across the country. The money's coming not only from North Dakota, but from throughout the country. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Matt.
I was just going to say, and I've read a lot of Rob's articles about out-of-state interests, and I don't think that's what we're talking about here. What a lot of what you write about is outside ideas that are getting kind of pushed onto North Dakotans. This is something that has been on the ballot multiple times by North Dakotans. We're just at the point where we're hiring somebody that has seen best practices in other states, things that got passed in other states that have failed and we want to avoid. So we're just kind of bringing in people that understand, but this is still, something that was reviewed by legislative council to work. I don't see it as an out-of-state interest. We just have backers that are from out of state that are helping us with some of the details.
Since we're talking about my feelings about this process, I don't like the initiated measure process. That's just even when I might like, as in this case, I might like the policy that's being advanced. I don't like the process. I don't think it's a good process. I don't think in the aggregate it produces good policy. And I don't like it when it's we saw like Marzy's Law, where it's like one guy from California just bankrolls the whole thing because he doesn't want to, there's not enough of a groundswell to come to the legislature and try to get a bill through there. I mean, I don't know. So there's a lot of things I don't like about the process. And having said that, I haven't looked at their finances or anything like that. I don't know. Maybe I'll have some criticism once I do. But it's difficult for me because I don't like the process, but sometimes it does advance an idea I do like. And listen, however I may feel about it, this is the way the game is. This is the way the rules are now. Just play by the rules, right?
Rob, we're all hypocrites at times. You just have to admit it.
I'm not being a hypocrite. I reject the premise that I am being hypocritical here, but we could talk about that another time. Gentlemen, thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you guys. Best of luck.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, that was a very interesting conversation about marijuana, and it's always such a because the marijuana debate occupies this very weird space in politics where you have kind of the libertarians who are like, just legalize it everywhere. You have kind of the people who are still believing in the the moral panic of marijuana and the reefer madness stuff. So it's always a weird debate to even have.
Yeah, I also think it's just like a cultural thing, right? I mean, I think Mark made the comment that alcohol is much worse for you than marijuana. I agree with that wholeheartedly, but we live in a world where, because marijuana was seen as a narcotic and sort of, the 60s and 70s and all that kind of stuff. But I thought both Representative Ruby and Mark did a really, really good job of explaining this measure in a very thoughtful, moderate way that hopefully doesn't come across as a bunch of stoners wanting to pass weed legalization.
It kept coming up, how critical I am of the initiated measure process. It's worth noting, at least at first blush, it's kind of like they're doing it the way it's intended to be done, right? Like it's not, I'm taking them at their word that it's not some like billionaire in another state who this is his hobby horse issue and he's just going to bankroll the whole thing. This is a genuine issue that North Dakotans have been multiple, I would say volunteer-led campaigns have been trying to pass. My problem is when people talk about the initiated measure process, that's what they envision is this sort of citizen-led volunteer campaign situation. And a lot of times it's not.
Yeah, but I would say I like the fact that they went through the legislature, didn't get it done there before they brought it to the ballot. The reality is if they're going to get signatures by July, they're going to have to spend hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars. And it's likely going to be bankrolled by some big organization with donors from out of state.
There's going to be some deep pockets behind it. But you can't ignore also there is legitimately an interest among a lot of North Dakotans in this debate.
Yeah, but I would also suggest that, these other measures you've been somewhat critical of in the past for out-of-state funding. Mrs. Wrigley and Shane Gettle and others, those are North Dakotans that stood up and had a press conference on Marcy's Law, right? So I don't know. I think that sometimes, and Rob, you're not alone, that maybe we give a little pass on things that we like more than things that we don't like. And I'll
write about the finances for this campaign too, and I'll mention the fact that they're. But you're right. In this instance, I happen to like the policy being advanced, and I also I'm a citizen of North Dakota. I can't, as much as I may not like the process, I can't ignore that it is the process. It does exist, and I'll probably vote for the measure. I vote on measures, even though I don't like the way they get to the ballot. I don't like the process.
Right.
I'm also a citizen, and like it or not, that's the way the game's played right now.
Yeah, and I think that's completely fair. That is the way the game is played. And, it's sort of like campaign finance and people wanting caps on campaign finance dollars. Well, so do I. But until that rule is in place, you better play by the rules that are on the field. I also think that both Representative Ruby and Mark did a really good job of talking about the business angle, the law enforcement angle.
They specifically addressed
some of those things,
right? Well, and that's how good policymaking works. Is
right.
You throw an idea on the table, other stakeholders come in and say, "Listen, we see problems," and then you try to address those problems. To me, that's good faith legislating.
Right. And I think the grow your own stuff is really interesting on how controversial that is. But I also agree with Matt when he said there's not going to be a lot of people growing their own weed if they can walk down the store and get it from the dispensary.
Right.
And so
how many people grow their own tomatoes, really?
Yeah.
Right.
No, that's exactly right. I'm not going to grow my own tomatoes. Right. Because I'm lazy.
Yeah. Well, in growing tomatoes, I have to think is probably easier than growing and harvesting marijuana. I don't know. I guess I have no idea. It always looks very complicated in the movies. There's lights and I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. This is my entire experience with growing marijuana is what I see in the movies. So it's probably not very accurate.
But again, I want to compliment this campaign. Both of these guys had their stuff together, their messaging done. There was no questions that stumped them. They're ready to roll here.
Well, Mark's a friend of mine, and he's a smart guy. And I shared his, as much as I wanted to legalize marijuana, I shared his reservations about the last measure. So to see him involved makes me think he's an attorney first and foremost. He's a very good attorney, and I think is going to be a real asset to their campaign. Let's switch gears. The other thing being talked about in Bismarck right now is, and this has come up kind of over the course of years. I think John Hageman one of our reporters at Forum Communications, had a story a while back about lawmakers who owned property that the state of North Dakota was leasing from, right, for offices for various agencies or departments or whatever. And that's on one hand, we have part-time lawmakers, and we don't pay them. It's not a full-time job, so therefore they have day jobs, right? They have every right to go out and pursue and make a living and pursue prosperity like the rest of us. On the other hand, there's no question that when you're a lawmaker and you're voting on the budgets for agencies that are in turn your customers for office space or what have you, there's no question that there's a potential conflict of interest. So there is a bill draft that's being considered in the interim here. And the bill draft would do several things. It would, first of all, require lawmakers to disclose their interests in all real property. That includes if they have an interest in a business that owns real property. It would require that when a state agency negotiates a lease, that everybody who owns the property is documented or has an interest in the property, and including like if it's like a rental company and then somebody is like a investor in that rental company, they have to disclose all of that. I'm trying to think of what else it does. I'm going to look that up right now, but I mean that's kind of the gist of it. What do you make of that?
Yeah, I mean all these things seem pretty. I mean nobody's saying that you can't rent property from lawmakers, right? I mean, this seems
well, the draft bill would say that it would prohibit any state entity from leasing property in which a lawmaker or an appointed official with authority over the entity has an interest. And for a lawmaker, that's going to be every state agency. I mean, if you're a lawmaker, basically it's going to say you can't do business with the state when it comes to property, I guess.
Yeah, and I think where I'm at it, I'm all for transparency. We should know if it's happening, so we can see if somebody's getting a sweetheart deal and sort of making money.
Sure.
Beyond that. But I also think the RFP process doesn't allow for somebody to jack up the prices on rent by any stretch of the imagination. So I don't know what people are nervous about in terms of adding transparency to this process.
I think the objections I've heard is, first of all, the outright. I mean, in the bill draft right now, there is an outright prohibition on anyone doing business with the state in that way. And I think you're saying the same thing that I'm saying. I don't want to stop it. I just want everybody to be aware of it, right? I want to be able to go and look up and say, how much money is this lawmaker making from leasing, and look at the lease amounts and be able to argue, is this a fair market amount? Like, I want to be able to do that, but I don't want to stop any lawmaker from making a living, up to and including, potentially renting to the state. So, I think the other thing too is that some of the disclosure requirements would require them to disclose property that's not even like commercial, right? So now I have to like disclose if I bought my son a house and I'm not renting it to anybody, I have to disclose that. Like, I could understand balking at some of that. I would amend the bill if I was in charge. I would amend the bills. I would remove the prohibition on leasing any property, and I would limit the disclosures to just anything that they're going to put out for lease.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. And again, I don't know why an elected official would be nervous about the transparency part of it, because people can figure that out anyway. But during a time when we are spending a lot of time and energy at Governor Burgum's sort of request of looking at the amount of office space we lease as a state, I think this can be part of that conversation.
Absolutely.
I mean, are we bloating our office space because, somebody can't afford to not rent it? And I'm not suggesting that's happening, but I think that this should be part of the whole conversation to make sure there isn't a conflict of interests for folks. And again, to your point, these are part-time legislators. They get to make a living. A lot of them, frankly, make a lot less money by serving in the legislature and can't maintain full-time employment in a lot of different places. So I would be against limiting their ability to make money, but we should know about it.
Yeah, no, I disclose, don't restrict. I think that's it. And listen, I think that's kind of the message, because there's a lot of people in the public I hear from like, well, we ought to block them from doing this or block them from doing that. Listen, you can't have it both ways. If you want a part-time legislature, and I think that seems to be the majority position of North Dakotans, if you want a part-time legislature, then you have to accept the fact that these people have day jobs. And that those day jobs are inevitably going to intersect with their public duties. And as long as we understand what their day job is and what those intersections are and how they voted, as long as it's all transparent, I don't think it should be a problem.
Well, and I think the way our legislature is done right now, it already limits the amount of people who are able to serve. And so I think we don't want to do anything else to make it even more limiting. I mean, so what next that, Nicole Pullman's a public school teacher, that she can't vote on anything offending, having to do with public school funding or anything.
She votes
like
on
that.
bills that include appropriations for her school district, or she did before she decided to.
And she should, because she's
Right.
an expert in this.
Right.
I mean, to remove people from these sort of conversations is silly.
we have a lot of farmers in the legislature. They can't vote on property tax things that are going to impact their bottom line. They can't vote on maybe economic development things or sort of the agriculture safety net, although a lot of that's federal. I mean, there's a lot of bills that come through that can affect the bottom line of a farmer, right? Of course they should be allowed to weigh in on that. Just be honest about what you are.
If you're going to have a citizen legislature, you're going to have some conflicts of interest. And we just need to know about those things. And
Right.
There's 141 legislators. It's not like it's a city commission with only 5 votes, right? Obviously, some legislators are more influential than others in terms of appropriations bills. But I think we need to be careful about doing things that will limit. Now, do I think that legislators should be getting sweetheart deals and hundreds of thousands of dollars in taxpayer dollars for rental property?
Of course
Heck
not.
no. But we should be aware of that and make sure that doesn't happen.
Yeah, and we should make sure that the public employees who are tasked with making those decisions don't in any way are protected from feeling any sort of a pressure, any sort of obligation to pick, something that a lawmaker's involved in versus something else, right? So I'm all for all of that. One thing, because you mentioned, you didn't understand why any lawmaker would be, and I guess that's kind of the argument. Like, well, if you don't want this stuff disclosed, what are you afraid of? And I got to admit, as a journalist, that's kind of where my mind goes. Like, what are you hiding? Understanding the environment that we live in, though, I see a lot of people using open records laws or disclosure laws irresponsibly, because they'll get some records and then they'll start drawing connections. They'll have like the board like Rick Becker had at his booth at the NDGOP thing, where there's like
with Charlie Day
with the red strings, like from here to in pictures and maps and everything. I see that happening a lot, and it happens a lot on social media. And I think the lawmakers are afraid, like, listen, I lease to the state, and somebody's going to look at that and just say, jump to the conclusion that there's something nefarious going on without bothering to look at the fact that, I'm leasing space to the state at a reasonable rate, and there's nothing untoward about it at all. I think that's some of the fear, and I understand it. It just can't be the argument that wins the day.
Yeah, and I think that is a legitimate fear, and it's the society we live in right now that people jump to conclusions and post stuff on social media and get other people to jump to conclusions, and it is too bad. But I think the taxpayers get to know if there's a potential conflict.
I absolutely, I agree with that. So I don't know that bill. And interestingly, Tracy Potter, who's this new state senator who took over for your wife, actually emailed me and said that he's planning on some amendments. Now he didn't get into specifics. I said, I'm very interested in what your amendments are. He didn't get into specifics with that, but it does sound.
I'm going to
like
make a prediction here, Rob. Tracy Potter is going to be the most active senator during the interim.
I think so.
That would be my guess.
Well, he'd really like to he's running for the state senate. He'd really like to hold that seat for Democrats. And of course, what better way to get some free publicity but to be in the headlines doing all sorts of stuff as a state senator. So yeah, that's a smart strategy on his part. We'll see see how it works in the end. What's that saying? It's a bold strategy, Cotton.
It's a bold strategy, Cotton.
No, I think that's actually really smart. So let's see, what else do we got going on in the state? We got a lot going on.
I think that one of the things that I'm really interested in, and I hope we talk about a lot more in upcoming podcasts, is what's going to happen in June. I think the Republican primaries, and you've seen the newspaper articles now of all the different Republican primaries, what's going to happen there. I mean, if I'm a normal moderate, I shouldn't say moderate, I get into these ideological sort of things, but sort of because it's more stylistic than actual policy. I'm a little nervous because it seems to me the electorate in North Dakota, and I've seen some polling that indicates this, they're just negative. They're negative about anybody who's connected to establishment. They're negative about whatever. Are they going to just, and they don't see Democrats as the alternative? Are they going to start
in a
just
lot of
voting
legislative races across the state? They don't even exist as an alternative. There's not even a candidate.
But I'm not so sure being connected to Doug Burgum and John Hoeven and those kind of establishment folks, is going to be as beneficial this June as it has been in past primaries. So I hope we can have some of the candidates on in future podcasts, because I think it's going to be a tough road leading up to June for a lot of incumbents.
Yeah, I agree. It's going to be very interesting, and I'm really watching a lot of those, because I mean that's kind of, I guess we've been talking about like the battle for the soul of the Republican Party for a while now, and I guess that's going to play out at the legislative level. I mean, look at I was writing about District 8, and I guess I could talk about this a little bit. I'm gonna have a column about this later today, and maybe by the time people listen to this, it'll already be out. But, District 8, you look at it, I mean, there's 6 Republican candidates for 3 legislative seats and no Democratic candidates. So, I mean, if you're looking for sort of a microcosm for what's going on, I mean, it's like the Democrats are bystanders in a lot of cases, and it's just this food fight within the Republican Party itself. And I don't know what ultimately shifts that, this sort of very negative, anybody who's attached to the establishment is bad. I don't know when does that attitude change? It's going to change inevitably, because these things come and go. But when is it? It's been around for a long time. When does it change?
Yeah, it feels like we've been talking about this forever in North Dakota. And, frankly, it seems like it's getting worse. I mean, you talk about District 8, but I think District 28 has like 6 people running for the House, all Republicans, or maybe, and 39 maybe has like 5
even look at the local races. I mean, they're nonpartisan, but a lot of the people running for school board and city council and city commission clearly have an ideological agenda that is driven by a lot of the culture war stuff that we're seeing.
Yeah, and I've talked to some school board candidates who've basically said, I'm running because we need to keep so-and-so, so-and-so, and so-and-so off the board, because they're the ones pushing sort of the furry CRT, sort of nonsense at school board meetings. And so, I mean, I think the school board races, I think Grand Forks had 23 candidates. Fargo's got over a dozen. Bismarck's got a dozen or so. It's going to be confusing for voters too. I mean, you're voting for 3 of 23 in Grand Forks. Good luck as a candidate getting your message through. But yeah, I mean, so these nonpartisan races are now coming down to ideological fights as well, between normal and more radical conservative views.
I think it's kind of and that always is the struggle in describing the factions, right? Because you use the term Bastiats, which is the name of a caucus within the legislature. They say, oh, we're not Bastiat members, which is technically true, but there's clearly a lot of ideological. You call them Trump supporters or people part of the Trump movement, but even that's not perfect. It's a culture war, right? And I think it's people who are very much running on culture war issues, which is critical race theory, or they're putting litter boxes out for students dressed up as cats or wolves, or I don't even know what that is. It's these culture war issues, and it's the people who are motivated by that versus people who are motivated by, we need to go do a good job of bonding out a new school, or just the more sort of prosaic things that these local government seats attend to.
And again, I think it's so much stylistic. I mean, a lot of these the people, the incumbent Republicans,
traditional Republicans, I think,
they're not moderate in ideology. They're conservative. Jessica Bell's a conservative. No matter how you look at it, she's a conservative. Her style is a little less bombastic than her opponents. I mean, so you see that all over the place.
Well, let's write that large. That was Hoeven Becker, right? What's the difference between Hoeven and Becker, right? Well, Hoeven voted. I mean, if Donald Trump, and I hate using Donald Trump as sort of the measuring stick of being a conservative. I hate that because I don't think he is one. But if that's important to you, John Hoeven voted with Donald Trump 92% of the time. right? I mean, the difference is that Rick Becker is going to be a Ted Cruz, Rand Paul, Marjorie Taylor Greene type and go out there and throw bombs, and John Hovard's just not. He's not going to be on Fox News lighting up the ratings. He doesn't see that as his job. He's going to be legislating as a conservative behind the scenes. That's what you're talking about stylistically.
Yeah, and so I think stylistic is one thing, but also that connection to the establishment. I mean, Roscoe Striley is closer to stylistically sort of that Bastiat sort of group, but because he would say hello to Doug Burgum in the hallway and work together on policy, somehow he's bad.
Roscoe,
so it's sort of hard to figure out where people are coming from on these
things. For people, Roscoe Striley he's a former lawmaker. He didn't run for re-election, but he's from District 3 in Minot, which is kind of the epicenter of the Bastiat movement. Sought the endorsement of District 3 at their convention a few weeks ago, didn't win it. And I spoke with him, and he said, I was evil because I said that I don't agree with Doug Burgum all the time, but I'm willing to work with him, right? And just going that far, not saying I agree with Doug Burgum or I'm gonna pursue his policy agenda in the legislature, just saying I'll have conversations with him, I'll sit down with him, I'll work with him. That was enough to earn him like the evil eye from people attending.
And again, every legislator, regardless of party or faction, should want to work with the sitting governor, no matter what party they are, because the governor has some influence that you think that folks would want to bring some juice home to District 3.
Right. Like, so you don't work with the guy, so you send him a bill and then he vetoes it, and now what?
Yep.
Right? I mean, the governor is a part of the legislative process. You better be. I mean, that's like saying I'm not going to talk to Josh Boucher or I'm not going to talk with Joan Heckerman in the Senate because they're Democrats and who cares about them? Well, I'm sorry. Even with the North Dakota Democratic Party holding a tiny, tiny minority in both houses of the legislature, they're still votes. They still matter. And if you want to get good policy through and have it become law and enforced and have it work, then I'm sorry, you got to get input from people like that.
Well, and it's interesting, you talk about the Democrats at the end of the last session, their votes are really damn important when it came to overturning or not overturning the governor's veto on a couple things. I mean, the governor's office was talking to the Democrats to make sure that the Dems would be with them because those votes were within 5 or 6, right, in the Senate. And that's the Dem caucus was 7. So there are times where those 7 votes matter.
So eventually I'm going to I'm going to be writing kind of a rundown of the primaries to be watching. But the legislative primaries, if you're interested in North Dakota, if you're interested in what's going to happen to the North Dakota Republican Party, what's going to happen to the direction of our state, those primaries are worth watching. Because again, with no Democratic candidates in a lot of these districts, that's the election. That's where it's at. And even sometimes when there is a Democratic candidate, let's face it, a lot of them are not, they're lambs to the slaughter. They're not going to win. So it's going to be whoever gets the Republican nomination is going to win in November.
One thing I thought was interesting, with the very few Democratic incumbents that are on the ballot, how many spots the Republicans still left empty. Tim Mathern's running unopposed. There's only 2 candidates in 44. There's only 1 candidate in 21. District 10, which is a new district with no incumbents, the Republicans weren't able to find 2 House candidates. So there's going to be a new Democrat from District 10, regardless of what happens in the House. And so, I think, again, where there's some competitive play, and maybe that's the polarization, right? Those districts are so blue that it doesn't make sense for Republicans to run. But, obviously the Dems.
I think if the North Dakota Republican Party was in a different place and not expending a lot of resources on its own squabbles within, then they would challenge every one of those races. Because why not?
For sure.
Why not? Yeah. I mean, they have the resources, they have the people. Why not? I think the problem is the party is distracted, and I think that if these inner squabbles continue, and the Republicans can't find a way to get along with one another, I think that's what you're going to start to see more and more. We're going to see it a little bit District 10 you just mentioned, but I think you're going to see more opportunities like that where people are going to get tired of the infighting and turn to Democrats as, hey, let's just get back to business.
Well, and you talk about what the Republican Party is going to do. What is the state Republican Party or district parties going to do in these races where a Republican incumbent's lost? I mean, does the state party provide voter files and that kind of things to Elke and Erbely and Bell and others? where do the resources go? How does Burgum handle those things? I think it's going to be really interesting to see sort of how the landscape sort of develops over the next month or two.
Yeah, I agree. Well, that's it for today's episode. Thank everybody for listening, as always. Coming up on, what do I have on Friday? I have something booked on Friday. And I'm actually going to be talking with a spokesman from the Saudi Arabian consulate, talking about energy prices, because obviously what Saudi Arabia chooses to do with oil production has huge implications, and everyone's talking about gas prices and everything. So actually going to be talking with someone from Saudi Arabia about that. So that should be interesting. Tune in for that on Friday. Chad, thanks for your time. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Rob.
Want more political news like this? Visit inforum.news/port to get 3 months of unlimited access to our news network for only 99 cents a month. Don't wait. Get this limited time offer at inforum.news/port now.